Chapter 18, Tale. Sunny meets me at the gate when I come home. She tells me what happened in the schoolyard. As usual, I'm tired from the work at the airstrip. I only half listen until she mentions Hee-won's name. Hee-won. Sometimes she comes to fetch Jeong-shin at our house. She's my age and really pretty. I feel my face growing a little warm. Sunny doesn't seem to notice. Good, she whispers. The principal took one look at her and sent her back to her place in line. No one is around to hear us, but I can tell she's afraid even so. He told Buntaro-san to pick someone else. I think for a moment, and then I say, they have no brother. No brother, she stops, thinking instead of asking. I choose my next words carefully. Their father must feel that there's no one but himself to watch out for his family. But does that mean, do you think he could be? She swallows. Like me, she can't say it. Can't say the words 친일파. Suddenly, I pound the gate, cursing under my breath. Damn the Japanese and this stinking war. Her mouth opens, then closes again, but there's still shock in her eyes. It's wrong to scare her even more. I try to speak calmly. It won't be easy for Jeong-shin, wondering if people might guess the truth, I say. You should be kind to her. Just be careful of what you say when you're with her. She nods, but still looks scared. I don't know what else to say. Later, I hear that those girls weren't even allowed to go home and say goodbye to their families. They were taken by truck straight to the train station. After that, probably a train to the coast and a boat to Japan. And then what? A factory somewhere sewing uniforms? Maybe. It's a warm spring night, the house dark and quiet. Everyone's in bed. Suddenly, there are loud voices at the gate. Before we can even get up off our mats, half a dozen soldiers burst into the courtyard. They turn on the electric lights and shove open all the doors. I blink and squint. I can hardly see. Up, all of you, their leader orders. Stand there, together, against the wall. Shivering in our night clothes, even though it's not cold. We gather around 아버지. 어머니's arms are crossed in front of her body. She's in her nightgown. Why won't they at least let her cover herself? The leader stays with us while his men search every room in the house. They open cupboards, throw things around, overturn furniture, lift the straw floor mats. After a few minutes, 아버지 clears his throat. If the honorable officer would be so good as to tell me what he's seeking, perhaps I could be of assistance in locating it. Treasonous writings, the officer answers curtly. Writings that express lies and slander against His Divine Majesty's benevolent presence in this country. And we need no assistance. If such writings are here, we will find them. You can be sure of that. Beside me, Sunny stiffens suddenly. I move my hand to take hold of her arm. She's trembling. I squeeze her arm a little, trying to calm her. Treasonous writings? Are they looking for copies of Uncle's newspapers? There aren't any here. I know that for sure. Right after he left, I looked all over the house a dozen times. I never even found a scrap of one. Besides, they'd searched the house themselves back then. Do they think he still contacts us? For the first time, I'm glad he hasn't kept in touch with us. If he had, they might find him somehow. One by one, the soldiers come back into the courtyard. They're all holding papers. They put them down on the table before the leader. I glance down quickly. Mostly 아버지's work, but also Sunny's diary. Is that why she's worried? Surely nothing she's written can get us in trouble. She's only a girl. The officer picks up the papers and looks over them quickly. Documents and lesson plans for 아버지's school. But the officer doesn't care about these. He looks at them, then crumples them and tosses them on the floor. Finally, he reaches for Sunny's diary. He flicks through the pages. Sunny clutches at her nightshirt, just like 어머니. The officer looks up. Whose stupid scribblings are these? He asks abruptly. Sunny answers at once. Mine, she says. I'm surprised by her voice. It's strong, not shaky. And she stops, trembling. He sneers. Idiotic thoughts written in a beautiful hand, he says. Do not waste the glory of fine kanji on such nonsense. It is a crime against our divine emperor. You are fortunate that I will grant leniency this one time. Any more of this, and I will not be so merciful. He hands the diary to another soldier and makes a brusque gesture. The soldier takes the diary to the kitchen and throws it into the stove. Sunhee takes one step forward. I pull her back. The officer finishes his inspection of the papers. He tears the last few into shreds. We know that this town breeds a worm of treason, he shouts. We will hunt it down and grind it under our heel. All of you have been warned. If we find later that you knew anything of this treason, you will suffer the same fate as the traitor himself. Then he stomps out in fury, his men behind him. The gate clangs shut. Sunny breaks free of my grasp and runs to the stove to try to save her diary. She reaches right into the fire. Too late. There are only a few burned scraps of paper left. She kneels on the floor, holding them, 어머니 next to her with a wet rag, wiping away the soot and ashes. Sunhee's fingertips are turning red, starting to swell. It must hurt, but she doesn't cry. I pace and clench my fists, wishing there was something I could do. 아버지 comes over, his face worried. He watches 어머니 tend to Sunhee, but doesn't say anything. He just stands there. Seeing him like that makes me remember one of Uncle's stories from years ago, when he'd been hurt after the Olympics. He couldn't work for a few weeks, so he stayed home. Sunny and I loved that. He was always around to tell us stories. My father, your grandfather, was a great scholar, Uncle had said. He was resting on his mat. Sunny and I were sitting on the floor to one side. He devoted his entire life to studying. It took him many years and many attempts, but late in life, he finally passed the difficult examinations and was appointed a scholar in the royal court. I was only a small boy, but I remember well how proud he was the day he put the jade button in his top knot. The button meant that he had passed the examinations. He let me touch it just once to feel how smooth and round it was. Uncle smiled, a sad smile, then shook his head. Only a few weeks later, the Japanese ordered all men to cut off their top knots and to wear their hair short in the Japanese style. They said top knots were too Korean. Your grandfather would not do it. He had worked too hard for the jade button. He looked away from us, at nothing, like he was seeing something inside his head, a place or time far away. His voice seemed to come from far away too. One day, 3 soldiers came to the house. They burst in without being invited and found my father in his room. 2 of them held him down while the 3rd one cut off his top knot, and one of them stole the jade button. I was young, only 4 or 5 years old. I hid behind my mother's skirt, so frightened. I wanted to help somehow, but what could I do? He shook his head again. But it wasn't enough just to cut off his beautiful top knot. One of them took a big handful of hair and threw it into the kimchi pot. He stirred it for a while, and all the time he and his friends were laughing. Uncle's voice was so angry that he had to stop speaking for a few moments. The kimchi pot. Every Korean home has one. A big ceramic pot sunk into the floor of the courtyard. So deep, a man can almost stand inside. The pot keeps the spicy pickled cabbage from freezing during the winter. The kimchi is scooped out with a huge wooden ladle. The pot is always carefully covered because anything that falls in is hard to get out. Strands of hair, it would have been impossible to get them all out. But where was Abaji? I asked. He was a lot older than you. Maybe he could have helped. Abaji is 10 years older than Uncle. Uncle frowned. I think he was there too, but maybe not. Maybe he was at school. I don't remember. For weeks afterward, my mother had to pick hair out of the kimchi. She tried to do it without my father seeing, but no matter how careful she was, there was sometimes still hair in the servings of kimchi. And every time this happened, my father could not eat. A few months later, he took ill and died. I do not remember what illness he had, but it does not matter. He died of a broken heart. I remember Uncle's eyes glittering with pain and anger. I remember something else too. How I felt hearing about Abaji, the way he'd done nothing to help. Back then, I couldn't understand it. Why hadn't he done something? Those soldiers tonight tearing apart our house? And me? I stood there frozen. I hadn't done anything. I hadn't even said anything. And I'm 3 years older than Abaji was then. I know now. What could he have done? What could any of us do?